The flowers, adorned with my ancestors' pain, hang low with preludial pride. My hip bones stick out, sharp and cutting like Venus flytraps, sickling girlish boredom on carpet floors. A pomegranate falls as I see her. Her left eye is squinting, crossed over, culminating a virginal moon. Her face, a carving of flesh and springtime decay. Hi friends, and welcome to a new video. Today I'm gonna do an ultimate guide to writing poetry in an abstract and personal way. If you don't know me, I'm Valentina Vapeau, and I'm a writer, poet, among many other things. I've written one book and I'm currently working on my second book, which will be a poetry collection. And over the past, 2 years, I've gotten a lot of questions about how I write poems, because poetry, especially due to the rise of Insta poetry and poetry just being generally more accessible to people, people also want to learn to write poetry. And at first, when I was getting these questions, I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be so hard because my writing process isn't super structured. But yesterday night I sat down and kind of came up with this sort of plan that can help you to get started with writing poetry. What I'm gonna do at first is kind of give you a little rundown, general tips, and then I'm gonna take a poem of mine and I'm gonna show you how I wrote that specific poem, because just reading these tips that I was writing, I was like, oh god, that doesn't really, like, how am I supposed to know how this works if I have no idea? So I thought this was gonna be a good way to start. Before we get started, a little, disclaimer. Poetry is a very, very large art form. At the end of the day, it can be whatever you want it to be. And even in my literature classes, we have had long discussion what even constitutes as poetry. So don't feel pressured by that, and we don't have to go into all of the what is poetry, because at the end of the day, it's really up to you. My first advice is something that you have probably heard a lot of times, and that is to read a lot. And specifically with poetry, I think it's important to read a lot of poetry. So there's many ways to approach this. You could either just read them and kind of see how words and sound kind of impact your body, what do they do to you when you're reading them. But also there's a different way, and it's kind of the classical way that you study poetry in school, so it's analyzing it. So what do these words do? What does the metaphor mean? How is it constructed? How are these stylistic devices made, and why are they made like that? And I know a lot of people are like, oh god, that feels like school, but you don't have to, write an essay. Just kind of take a poem or get an anthology of poems or something you've seen online or somewhere, and kind of sit down and really try to dissect it in a personal way. It doesn't have to be for school. It's more about how you react to it and how you believe that the poem was constructed. My second tip is using prompts. Right now it's April, and April is National Poetry Writing Month, so there's a lot of resources going on in May, and I'm gonna give you 3 prompts at the end, which kind of just help you, push you into direction. I study creative writing, so in our classes we often have these kind of prompts, and they are really helpful when you're just sitting there being like, I don't know what to write about, I don't know where to start. My next tip works for some people and it doesn't for other people, and that is using form and structure. So for example, if you want to start easy, you could use a haiku, which is a Japanese, very simple, very short form of poetry. Or if you want to kind of have a more tight corset, then you could use more classical structures like a villanelle or a sonnet. And if you don't really know what they are, you can basically look them up and learn about the structure of them and then try to implement your own thoughts into them. For me personally, for example, I had a time where I was writing quite a lot of sonnets, and sonnets are very, very hard to write like in a good way and to use all of the rules, because there's rules considering the metrum, so the sound of how each word flows, but also like what topic comes where and how each verse interacts with the other verse. And I would, for example, just ignore some of the rules. I tried writing in a metrum, but then it wouldn't work, and then I would just be like, oh, whatever, I'm throwing this off the rails. It's fine. It's really all fine. High poetry kind of has a pretentious air, so I feel like a lot of modern poets wouldn't necessarily say, oh yes, I'm definitely doing it, but I think it's a very helpful tool, and that is using rhyming dictionaries or synonym dictionaries like thesaurus, for example. So you could just literally Google a rhyme dictionary or whatever. So you could have like a word, but there's nothing that rhymes for you like right now in your mind, so you can use it. Or for example, you have a word, but somehow it doesn't really fit within the structure, or the sound just kind of throws you off, but from a content perspective you want to talk about that. So you can use synonyms, and sometimes this can really be like a jumping point, because it's like, oh, you forgot this word even existed, but then you go from there, and this word that you find kind of helps you go further and gives you inspiration for other words, other topics. So kind of just let it flow in that sense. And I think, yeah, honestly, you know, we live on the internet, why not use the tools that we have right now? And nobody has to say that they were, you know, writing it with a rhyming dictionary, because even today, you know, people are very pretentious about all of this, but honestly, I don't really care. To me, what matters is the poem at the end of the day, and not exactly how it was written or what tools were used. A big part of literary writing is using stylistic devices that you have learned in school. And how do you use them? Because, you know, when you learn about them to analyze literature, you don't really learn how to use them. But what I would do, for example, is you have a feeling or you have an idea. Say, for example, I am sad. You don't want to write, I am sad. So you could, for example, look at a little list of stylistic devices, for example, for school, and you just kind of start making up stylistic devices. So you just go through the list and go like, okay, this like metaphor works like this, a simile works like this, personification, allegory, they all work this way, and you just kind of sit there and make up sentences that work for the stylistic device. And then you maybe have 5 sentences and you're like, okay, I like this one, the other ones kind of suck, they're weird, and then you just go from there. Something that I believe is very crucial to being a poet or writing poetry is noticing very, very small things. The smaller, the more precise, the better. So for example, right now we have this weird sound from outside. I'm in Mexico with my uncle who also studied literature, and somebody is drilling something outside. So you could literally take little things that are happening that you notice and just integrate them in your poetry. Or even just when you're just walking around and there's things that you see and that kind of have or make an impact on you, just write them down, and then later you can use them, because it's things that when you're just sitting on a desk you wouldn't naturally come up with. So it's a lot about noticing the world, about being a bystander, listening, seeing, tasting, feeling. All of this is what you then can transform into words that make sense in your poem. Depending on the poem, I really like writing abstract poetry. And how does abstraction work at the end of the day? And for me, abstraction is like mental jumping in a sense. So you could, again, like I said, have a sentence, have a thing, for example, say a pear. So you want to write about a pear for whatever reason. You're not going to write, oh, there is a pear. You're going to be like, okay, this pear, what does it look like? It looks like a woman. Or it looks like a cube, it looks like something else. Where does it grow? Is it growing on trees? Or what does it taste like? Does it taste sweet or sour? Or does the pear taste like battery acid? For whatever reason. So you just kind of go from one point to the next, and it's all about constantly asking yourself where, how, why. So you have something very mundane that you would write about, but you kind of just jump in your mind. Whatever comes up, and if you don't like it, you can go from there and jump again, jump again. So for example, I had a pear, but now I'm at a skyscraper, and now I'm at battery acid. I don't know how this came into my mind right now, but this is the creative process of poetry in a sense, and you can just start writing, and at the end of the day, you can, you know, delete things if they don't make sense. And then my last general tip would be using a framing or a story that you're telling. So there's many ways to approach poetry. You could have a sentence at first, you can have a feeling, you can have an idea. And I personally love poetry that sets a frame or that tells a story. So if you have a simple story, like you could literally take, for example, a fairy tale that you know, Cinderella. You know how the story works. And you can use it as a frame to subvert it, to change it, to use the elements of the stories and then completely throw them off. But it could also always be your own story. It could be something that you make up in your mind or something that you have experienced. And what to me changes prose to poetry, and this is a very personal notion because there is prosaic poetry as well, is that you don't just write down chronologically how it happened, but you really switch it up, abstract it, so that the reader wouldn't necessarily know the exact story while they're reading it, but the clues are there, and if they take the time and if their interpretation aligns with the story that you had in mind, then that is beautiful, it's grand, it's what makes poetry at the end of the day. So those are my general tips. I hope this helps you in some way, but now we're gonna look at a poem that I wrote and how I wrote it. Hell is no evil. Frozen dead bodies burn my bloody intestines with gastric acids. My own one, somewhat alive. A door falls open, filled with cinnamon scent. The flowers, adorned with my ancestors' pain, hang low with preludial pride. My hip bones stick out, sharp and cutting like Venus flytraps, sickling girlish boredom on carpet floors. A pomegranate falls as I see her. Her left eye is squinting, crossed over, culminating a virginal moon. Her face, a carving of flesh and springtime decay. She touches me, bare-hipped and ripe, scattered her rose-colored paws, stockings in pink, covering nothing but nudisks, ruffled cotton dresses clinging to skin which seems to be mine. She steps over the Ferris wheel in her childhood room, a dandy candle on a pearl-white armoire, and I cannot stop to become what I long for. My self-bare falls as I sling towards her. It's hushed and so sudden, how our legs lock, blood droplets dance while a kiss is stolen above Cupid's bow. Up is the baby doll, all is exposed. I hug her in fever, because hell is no evil. It's girlhood exposed. So let's start. How did I write this poem? This poem starts with the notion of sadness, or the sentence, I am sad. But what does the sadness look like and what does it feel like? And the sadness that I wanted to write about feels like a burn in the stomach. The first verse is, frozen dead bodies burn my bloody intestines with gastric acids. So we have something, you know, before this verse exists, it burns my stomach. And then I started using, okay, what's a different way to write about the stomach? It's intestines, okay? Intestines are gruesome, they're kind of medical, and it makes it sound more raw. And then I use an adjective, which is bloody intestines. You could just say the intestines, but bloody intestines gives you this visual imagery of it being red. I mean, the intestines aren't literally bleeding when they're in your body, but it gives you this notion of how red and violent they are in a sense. So this deep red imagery of the intestine is abstract in a sense because, like I've said, the intestine can't really bleed if it's working properly, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's actually bleeding and this pain is even more gruesome in a way. So we have this. We are in the stomach area. What else is in the stomach that conveys this feeling? And to me, the first thing I came up with was gastric acids, because it's a human part or like a human liquid, but it's very aggressive and makes this notion of pain more intense. But now I'm asking myself, what is burning? Because right now the verse is something undefined. So for example, something burns my bloody intestines with gastric acids. And here I come to this idea of, what do I want to write about? What is the topic? What is the larger idea? And to me, this poem is in part about ancestry, about queer women who came before this lyrical eye, who have been oppressed. And so, you know, dead people. Now, this whole idea of the intestine is bloody, it's hot, it's red. what is the opposite? How can I contrast it? And that's cold. So frozen dead bodies. It's very vile, it's very disgusting, but it's why I like it, I guess. So now we have the first verse, and we also have the general idea, the story that I want to tell, which to me is, it's queer love between women, it's intergenerational female pain from the women who came before the speaker, and girlhood. So the next verse that I want to discuss is, the flowers adorned with my ancestors' pain hang low with preludial pride. So I start with classical symbolism, which relates to womanhood, flowers. It's a very easy way, and some people who write poetry are like, oh, don't write about roses, don't write about like the most basic poetic things you've read. But what I like to do is use them and subvert them in a way. So now we have these flowers, and I write that the flowers are adorned with my ancestors' pain, and it gives you this image of a flower that is looking sad because of the weight of the oppressed women who came before this speaker. And because these flowers are sad, they are hanging low with what? With preludial pride. So yes, in a sense, these flowers are, you know, drenched in this pain of all of the oppression that has been happening for centuries. But at the same time, these words preludial pride come from this idea that these women, which are represented in the flowers, still feel prideful because of the hope that they have for the next generation of queer women. And preludial is something that came to me because of its sound, but because I was, you know, thinking about this idea of womanhood and what it represents, and I was thinking about grand orchestra and classical music. Maybe I was listening to classical music while I was writing this, I don't really remember, but a prelude is the introduction of an orchestra piece. So this could have been also interludial pain or pride, sorry, interludial pride, or a balladic pride, because I wanted to have pride that has a connotation to classical music, making it very grand and beautiful. But I took the prelude because it furthermore conveys a sense of hope, you know, it's an anticipation. These women who are, again, I'm sorry for like saying this so many times, but it's a bit hard to explain, I guess. These women that are represented in the flowers are, you know, hanging down because of the pain, but they are also prideful for the next generation in anticipation. So it's not a manly kind of pride. They're like, ooh, you're gonna rock it. It's a very female notion. It's musical, it's lyrical, it's beautiful. And that's why it's preludial, because they are waiting for the big orchestra, for the big music to happen. This is so weird to explain, but I think it kind of gives you this sense of how A, my mind works, but B, how you can apply this to yourself. You have this idea, and then you just come up with the most random things and just keep adding them, and they're not random because they have meaning, but the way that my creativity or your creativity works is hard to understand. You can't be like, oh, there's no recipe for it, so you just have to kind of go with your thoughts and go with your feelings at the end of the day. So unfortunately, my neighbors are playing very loud music and the sound is getting very distracting, so I'm gonna switch rooms. See you in a second. So I switched rooms and I hope the sound is a little better now. The next verse that I wanted to talk about is, my hip bones stick out sharp and cutting like Venus flytraps. And I personally love writing about bodies, about the female body, and you could use anything that you notice about a body and change it, make it bigger, make it smaller, abstract it. So for example, I don't know, I have really long and like skinny, weird fingers. So I could be writing like my fingers are like long snakes, or like a branch of tree, like a tree branch that is very like spindly, and you know, something like that, some image that comes to your mind. Or if you're speaking about like a round and soft belly, it could be like dough or bread or something beautiful. It could be something that's more abstract, that doesn't make sense. It could be anything that you come up with at the end of the day. And that is what happens here with this verse, because this poem to me is about what it's like to be a young woman. And it's also about the transition of a very genderless kind of square body into more curvaceous ones. And for me, when I think about, you know, me kind of before puberty, I think of my hip bones that would always like stick out because I was literally just like a square. And, you know, like through puberty, I got a little bit of some curves. And a little disclaimer here, because I think it can be triggering in a way. I chose to write about a very skinny, boyish body that has these hip bones that stick out, but of course you can write about all types of bodies. And, you know, not every young girl who is like, you know, at the beginning of puberty is skinny. I know that, of course, and you can write about the vastness of different bodies and at different stages and how they change and how they develop. But for this poem specifically, I wanted to play with this idea of what it means to be a girl and what a girl also looks like. And we associate girlhood with being skinny and being frail and delicate and beautiful. So I used this and then I subvert it into something else, because, you know, the next part of the verse is sharp and cutting, like Venus flytraps. And these fly traps are something very powerful. They can literally trap somebody. It has this connotation of seduction in a way, because you just take somebody in, and them being sharp and cutting also goes away from this idea of like beauty at the end of the day, because when we think of a body that's sharp and cutting, you know, that has a sense of pain to it at the same time. And yeah, I don't know, I just wanted to say this because sometimes when people write about, you know, topics that are very heavily discussed in a more political sense, then people are very quick to say, oh, but this romanticizes being skinny. And I mean, if that's your interpretation of the poem, that's very fine, but that's not what I want to write about, and that's not what this poem means. To me, it's literally about stating what we believe a girl is and then destroying it in a sense. So next up is topics or telling a larger story. I've told you what, you know, content-wise this was supposed to be about, but the framework that I used is this young girl falling in love with Persephone, which is the goddess of the underworld, but also the goddess of spring and summer. And to kind of not be like, oh, and then Persephone came, I wrote my next verse, which is, a pomegranate falls as I see her. So I introduce Persephone as a Greek goddess and as an idea, not by, you know, stating her name, but by a symbol that represents her, which are the pomegranate seeds. So by using the pomegranates and Persephone, I kind of cut back to Greek mythology and its symbolism. It's like the most obvious one when you think about Persephone. And the story of Persephone, I'm gonna summarize it really quickly, is that Persephone was, you know, taken and abducted by Hades into the underworld, and her mother made eternal winter happen because she was a goddess of spring and plants growing. And when she's down in the underworld, Hades wants her to eat something, because if she eats something in the underworld, she will have to stay forever. And she doesn't want to, but at the end of the day, I mean, the story is much longer than this, but she eats 6 pomegranate seeds and makes a trade with Hades that she can go back on Earth for 6 months at a time. It's when we have spring and summer, and she can let the plants grow, she can have the animals made, she can, you know, make the world beautiful in that, you know, natural sense. But then after 6 months, when fall comes, she's again abducted by Hades. I mean, she goes back to the underworld. So yeah, and that's why instead of using it in an obvious way, I just use this symbolism. So some people will understand it and some other people won't, but it's not about saying, oh, like this girl falls in love with Persephone and everybody has to understand it. It's about giving this poem more nuance and a layer to it. In my general tips, I also talk about being precise, and an example for that would be the verse, stockings in pink covering nothing but knee discs. I mean, you could write, okay, so you have this image in mind, you have this girl and she's wearing stockings. But by giving it color and also by writing about knee discs, you make it more precise. It could be, oh, she's wearing stockings that only cover her knees or go up until her knees or whatever. But I was thinking, okay, so I've been writing about anatomy and like a medical way of approaching the body in the sense of bloody intestines and gastric acid. These are like very medical terms in a sense that, you know, have this like gruesomeness to them. And so I'm thinking about knees. How can I describe knees in a more precise way? So knee discs, because it has this like geometric form, it's a disc, it has something very rational, very clear, but it's contrasted by, you know, giving the stockings color, making them pink, making them girlish, and opening up yet another contrast. The next verse is blood droplets dance whilst a kiss is stolen above Cupid's bow. Okay, again, my idea is the story. The story is girl one is very young and girlish and she meets Persephone, who is also, it's also a young version of Persephone. I haven't said that, but it also doesn't really matter. I think through reading the poem you can kind of tell that they're both the same age. And I want to write about their first kiss. They meet each other, you know, pomegranate falls as I see her, she comes in, they're in her childhood room and they're gonna kiss. So again, I like to use very standard classical ways of talking about love or womanhood or whatever and subverting them, and for me that's Cupid's bow. So usually, kind of like a mistletoe, you would say, okay, they kiss beneath Cupid's bow. But how do I abstract it? Well, invert it, and it's they kiss above Cupid's bow. But what does that mean? Are they floating in space? I mean, they're in a room. Where is Cupid? What world is this even set in? So for the reader, there's a lot of questions that can come up that, you know, develop their own thinking process and how they react and read this poem. And then again, there we have to steal a kiss, you know. Stealing a kiss is also a very common way of saying it, but in this whole verse, it, you know, has this commonality, but also this weirdness of them being somehow above Cupid's bow, where this kiss is being stolen. And also, if you think about it more, we can say, oh, I stole a kiss, and it's very cute, but when you really think about it, in a more, I don't know, like if you just think about it more, it's also what does it really mean to steal a kiss? So that's why I put it. But then we have the verse that goes before that, which is blood droplets danced whilst. Okay, what the fuck? I still have this idea of queer women, the ancestry, who are still present somehow in the realm of the situation, even though they're dead, they're no longer present. So what is an abstract way to think about these dead women? It's blood to me. I don't know why. And somehow these women are very excited because they're seeing, oh, these women are liberated from, you know, queer phobia or from oppression, and they are excited. So the blood droplets, which represent these ancestors, are dancing in anticipation for the next verse, because it's blood droplets dance creates anticipation for what? Why are these blood droplets dancing? And even if you don't really read, oh, the blood is the women, it still creates this effect that, oh, something is gonna happen, and then they kiss. And now we come to the last stanza of the poem, which is, I hug her in fever because hell is no evil, it's girlhood exposed. And here we come to what I also said in the beginning, which is reading a lot of poetry and reading a lot of literature. The idea behind this whole poem, I've said this so many times, I'm so sorry, is subverting girlhood and showing that even though we associate girlhood with something pretty and delicate, it's really gruesome and evil. And I have conveyed these through all of the words and verses and metaphors and everything that I've said until now. I am a big fan of Jean-Paul Sartre, and in his play No Exit there is a very famous line which is, hell is other people. And this is a sentence that has just, you know, stuck with me. And because we're also speaking about Persephone, the idea of hell or the underworld is very present. So what I want to say is that, you know, girlhood is not this beautiful thing. It's something very painful. Young teenage girls feel emotions or depression, sadness, anxiety in a very, very deep way that is quite painful. So by saying hell is no evil, it's girlhood or girlhood exposed, I kind of put girlhood onto the same level as hell, or depending on your own interpretation, even worse. You know, it could be both, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because what matters to me as a writer is ending this poem, which is full of beautiful and lyrical la la la, by saying, hey, yeah, it's really not that pretty to be a young girl or to be a young girl in love. It's really painful. Hell is no evil. It's girlhood exposed. That was my discussion of my poem. I hope this helped you in a way. To me, it's a bit weird and awkward talking about my process of writing because we mystify writing poetry so much, and you know, you could read this poem. Maybe I'll put the link to the Instagram post where there's a picture where you could just, you know, sit down and read it, and maybe your interpretation is completely different from everything that I've said. And that is completely fine because it's literally the point of poetry and literature. But to kind of give you my process, I have to tell you what I was thinking so you can apply it to your own writing. And that's why I have 3 amazing prompts by a very cool poet that I admire, which is Amy Kay, and she does amazing prompts that I like to use. And my first prompt is write a poem based on the title of your favorite song. So take that title and sit down and be like, what does this song mean to me, but also how can I change it? You're not gonna just, you know, write the song and that's gonna be your poem, because that's literally just copying. But you can take just the title and then come up with something completely different. Or you could take lines from the song and lyrics and just, you know, change them. Or maybe you read a certain part of the song and it evokes something in you that has nothing to do with the song, and that's where you start with that poem. Next, I have write a poem about a cure for something you can't cure. This could be something silly, like heartbreak, and you could, you know, use like your mother's Vaporub cream that you rub like all over your body to cure this heartache. It could be something, some kind of remedy from your culture that you use to cure heartbreak, which, you know, can be, it can be a very sad poem, but it can also be silly and fun in a way, because you know, can cope by making it a bit weird or using things like, I don't know, whatever comes to your mind really. And the last prompt I have, and I'm gonna also read you one last poem, is write a list poem. So list poems are basically, you make a list, kind of like a shopping list or whatever, and experiment with this form. This specific prompt helped me write a poem which is called 15 Ways to Stay Alive. And I also kind of want to show you how your writing can be really anything, and you don't have to have a very specific style when you're just starting out, or even now I don't really think I have a very, very specific style. And Hell is No Evil, you know, uses word clouds or word fields, however you want to put them, which is Greek mythology and classical references like classical music. It's girlhood, so it's the pink, it's the teddy bear, it's the candles, it's all of that. And then also anatomy and blood and like something evil. This is how that poem worked. But then 15 Ways to Stay Alive is more rooted in modern life, and also what I said in the beginning, using a structure or a story that you want to tell. For 15 Ways to Stay Alive, I use my number 1 is birth, and I don't want to give it away, but it's death, you're gonna see. So yeah, just this connotation of, okay, I want to write about birth till death and all the in-betweens, and kind of use more modern references, creates a completely different poem than Hell is No Evil. 15 Ways to Stay Alive. 1. Eat raw sugar cane from your mother's belly button. Cradle the mother cake of creation in your sleep. 2. Realize the frailness of your breathing. How a room lacking oxygen could kill you. How the lack of food you indulge in could render you dead. Care is the water within you. Despise it. Be thankful for keeping you alive. 3. Be oblivious. Forget that you're dying. Inhale too much peach puff. Don't hide the nicotine addiction from yourself. You're dying. Go cherish your unavoidable death. 4. Dance in old ballrooms. Step on your lover's feet while you're failing to attempt a waltz. Dance in dark rooms under the city's surface. Do too many drugs just so you can attempt a straight-edge life tomorrow. 5. Drink overpriced green juice and bow down to hyper-accelerated late capitalism. Make productivity your religion. Work at paper-thin laptops. Sweat at boutique cycling studios. Drink €7 lattes at designer cafes. You cannot escape it anyways, so at least pretend to enjoy corporate core. 6. Be European with a little arrogance. Remember you're really a pre-Columbian empress whose skin has been scrutinized under the horrors of Spanish colonialism. Remember all of it, but don't forget that you're white. 7. Don't love as foolish as displayed on those suburban cheese platters. Love with reckless abandon. Forget your freedom for the sake of your lover's many breaths. Kiss their thighs over and over again, like they're your first, even though you've slept with countless people and you shouldn't be caring. 8. Read the books that you know you will hate just to feel something. 9. Drink wine in gulps. Embarrass yourself in a room full of women that you admire. 10. Make terrible art at least once a year. 11. Write lists with the names of your lovers. Call them Lightning Boy, Ice Cube, Golden Boy, or even Knife. You know these pen names are stupid, but for now that must suffice. 12. Call the girls you've kissed silly names, but adore them in silence while your life keeps walking on. 13. Cover your skin in metal chains from the hardware store, just to buy river pearls and frilly dresses some seconds later. Wear heels to stomp on your enemies. Wear them to obliterate the self-doubt you know you need for your art. 14. Bathe yourself in loathing. Swim in depression like it's fresh milk from a steel can. 15. When a disease haunts you, when the truck is driving too fast, don't forget to let go of all of you have been told. There might be no afterlife, but there will be your last breath. So that was it, my complete guide to writing personal and abstract poetry. I hope you liked this. I hope it helped you in some way. And I hope I'll see you in my next video.